and welcome to Festival of Place Social Impact. This is a learning event where we hear from experts and professionals on how we can make a meaningful difference to the lives of people through the design, development, and delivery of property and places. I'm so pleased to be here for this session where we're continuing our deep dive into delivering a positive social impact on this day one, for which the focus is primarily on housing. And all of our sessions, so that you know, are recorded and available to stream live or play back via the schedule button, which is located on the top right. So a reminder, we'll be taking questions from the audience. You can put your questions in the Q&A tab in the chat panel to the right of the screen. Please feel free to use the chat for your comments and the emoji button to share resources. The speaker slides and any other links will be found in the resources tab, and they are available to download. In this session, we'll be adopting the lens of a just transition, delivering social impact through decarbonisation and assessing social risk in the context of sustainable and ESG finance. We rely on our sponsors and organization members to keep our events accessible and our journalism barrier-free. So I want to take a moment to thank LDA Design, who are proud supporters of this event, and to you, our organization members, for your support. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker. That is Chi Oranefo, Director of Sustainability and ESG Finance Team at Lloyds Bank. She has significant experience in supporting clients to deliver finance transactions across a number of sectors. She was at the forefront of developing a sustainable finance legal specialism and assisting clients to navigate their journey through this evolving landscape. She sits on the committees of various ESG industry and sector groups and represents Lloyds Bank on various ESG-related work streams for the Loan Market Association and CREFC, and collaborations with the Green Finance Institute and UKGBC. So I am super excited to welcome Chi to the stage.
Hello.
Hello, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Christine. Really a pleasure to be here. I do question whether I'm well qualified. I'm going to preface everything that I say by saying that I'm not a just transition practitioner, but I do, through my role as a sustainable financier, think about just transition quite a lot. So hopefully I've got something that's worthwhile sharing with you and everyone listening today.
Okay, we are so interested to hear about your work. So I look forward to your questions after, and over to you.
Thank you. And I'm loving the fact that you get feedback in some form. That's really helpful. So thank you, guys.
Keep those emojis coming, everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So thank you again for inviting me. Let me just flip onto the first slide. So this slide is, I know, complicated, and there's a lot on there. In a way, maybe I'm just trying to show off, but I'm also trying to illustrate the complexity of the platform that I sit on. So I work for Lloyds Bank, but that is just one of 16 companies that form part of the Lloyds Banking Group. And what you'll see there on the left-hand side of that slide is all of the different kind of clients that we have, and also, sorry, in the middle of it, the slide as well, in terms of supply and accessibility, the different clients that we have, the different organizations we have, that many of which just relate to housing, but through different lenses. So I'm just going to pick out a few of them to illustrate what I mean by that. So on the left-hand side, you can see an icon there for MADE, which is the partnership that Lloyds Bank has with Homes England and Barratt's as well. We came together last year to see whether we could come together as three large organizations on unlock through a sort of master planning lens, large infrastructure to release housing. We obviously are a financier, but we also have a network, and we can convene people and bring people within our network to do that and contribute the different elements that one needs to unlock a lot of finance housing, as was already our goal before this government came in. You've also got the Housing Growth Partnership there, which is an entity that invests equity into house building projects. And then you've got the names of some of our largest clients there. So we finance all of the listed house builders and many of the SME or mid corporates that house build in the country. On the housing association side, we finance something like 170 plus housing associations, and have given 20, or I say given, have lent 20 billion pounds to the social housing sector in the last 5 years. And just to give you a picture of how that big it is more than the government has given to that sector. So, we are very much entrenched in the social housing piece. And I'm just back from the social housing conference last week. And then apart from that, we, on the other side of our bank, and the things that the side of the bank that you'll know much more familiar with, is the retail side of the bank. So 1 in 4 or 5 mortgages are actually issued by a Lloyds Banking Group company. So we realized, I think about 3 years ago, about the time that I joined the bank, that we were part of this amazing housing or built environment, if you like, an ecosystem. And we began to think more intentionally about what we could do with that and how we could leverage it. On the right-hand side of that slide, you can see some of our sustainability-related initiatives. So again, I'm going to show off a little bit and say that I work for the team, the real estate and housing team, that has 3 times in a row now won the Real Estate Capital Award for real estate from a sustainability perspective. Why is that? It is, I think, partly to do with the fact that we take this sort of whole ecosystem approach, which means that we do not just lend into the housing industry, but we also partner with key organizations that are supporting the industry or intervening in the industry. So you can see there the Crisis logo. 2 years ago, we formed a partnership with Crisis, where our CEO, Charlie Nunn, joined with them to call for 1 million new homes. And we committed to doing as much as we could do on our platform to promote that. We've also got a sponsorship of the social housing sustainability reporting standards, and we have been key in the next generation sustainability standards, which are for house builders, but we principally have focused on how we can support the SMEs to engage with sustainability. And then lastly, there's Regeneration Brainery there. Now, they are an organisation that support going into schools to teach people about the opportunities that are available to them in the real estate industry. And again, I think most people would say that actually they're not that aware of what the multiplicity of things that you can do within the real estate industry. Most people think about construction, they think about estate agents, and probably that's about it. But as we all know, there's so much more. So that kind of gives you a picture of what we call supply, accessibility, and sustainability, but that gives you a picture of our overarching ecosystem. So I'm going to talk a little bit more now about what I actually do. I'll stay on this slide for a little while, but then move on to some numbers, because bankers love numbers. So I like to picture what I do in 3 concentric circles. At the center of that, there's sustainable finance, and that is doing things like green loans, sustainability linked loans, effectively trying to support clients to go along and further their journey in sustainability whilst giving them sort of normal BAU financing. So that's the first thing that I do. And as a bank or as a group, we've actually set sustainable finance targets, and our real estate and housing team, which I lead from a sustainability perspective, have been absolutely core to the delivery of that target number. Around that, I'd say the second ring of what I do is to support clients. So even if we're not financing them, our clients can come to us and ask us what we think about sustainability and what they need to be doing, and we will give them that advisory on a paid or unpaid basis. We have a tool called the Green Buildings tool, which all of our clients can use for free, where you can input your address and it will pull up your EPC and then extrapolate that to the retrofit measures that you need to undertake, the cost of those, and your payback period. We thought that that was really important when we launched it in 2019 to enable people to take the first step in their journey and understand exactly what it is that they needed to do, particularly in that SME space. I sit within a team of 30 people. We are industry focused. Well, I actually have a legal background that joined the bank 3 years ago to do sustainability and support on sustainable finance, as I've described. But we have people that cover higher education, agriculture, infrastructure, and all other sectors as well. I'd say we're probably in our fourth version now, version 4.0. There've been a lot of iterations because the sustainability space has grown and changed so much over the last 3 years. But I think what's been clear is that the bank, at least the platform that I sit on, is 100% behind sustainability. So I would say, regardless of what you're hearing in the headlines about sustainability and even DEI, I very much sense that, and we hear from the top, that Lloyds Bank is not going to be moving away from sustainability. And in fact, it's a core value of the bank. And the next slide, is just there really to illustrate from a sort of hard numbers perspective rather than just my opinion in terms of where sustainable finance is. So this is not to say that sustainable finance, that's green loans, green bonds, etc., is it's not the majority, obviously, of the financing market. But what this graph illustrates is that it's not going away. And there definitely was a point, I think, in the back end of 2023, moving into 24, where we were wondering, as those numbers were going down, whether we actually just had our peak in 2021. But it came back last year. And I think it came back because it's almost become BAU. People understand that they need to be moving towards sustainability. In this industry, obviously, we've got on the macro scale, we've got the 2050 target. But in this industry, for example, within social housing, you have a 2030 EPCC target. And we know that MEES is also going to require amelioration of poor performing portfolios. So that is there, and that is essentially my BAU, my day to day. But I'm fortunate to be on a platform that allows me to take a wider role. So thinking about that wider role in a little more detail, part of my team is made up of what we call our climate strategy team. They, in 2023, began running climate credible transition plan assessments on our top or most highly emitting clients. We obviously had this period between 2021 and maybe 2022, 23, where people were setting very, very ambitious net zero targets. I think everyone's obviously had pause for thought on those because we've realized how difficult it is. And I think people have realized how much you need to approach the entire ecosystem. There's not that much, none of us are in control of all of our reduction in carbon. But what credible transition plans do is say, okay, you've set your target for reduction in carbon, but how are you practically actually going to implement that? We've got to understand that transition isn't just linear. It can be a bumpy road, and it requires a more holistic approach. So after doing that with our most highly emitting clients, they've now come to real estate and housing, and they're supporting us using the task force for, the transition planning task force methodology in the real estate sector. What's also interesting is that the TPT was very clear that it didn't just want to be about carbon. It also has a nature element and a just transition element. So that's where I think this comes in. But I would definitely encourage people to look at the work that we've done with credible transition plans on the Lloyds Bank website, and also actually just look at our sustainability report, because you'll see a lot more detail on this in the organisations that I've mentioned before. So just now sort of zoning in a little bit more on just transition, right? So what does that really mean for us in real estate? What happened in terms of my journey was I started hearing the phrase just transition, but wasn't really sure what it meant. And it is a difficult definition. It is a difficult concept to really grapple with. Many people would just say it's to do with ensuring that no one is left behind. It's a concept that came up from the energy sector, in fact. So a very easy way of thinking about it in the UK is casting your mind back to what we saw in this country in the north in the 70s and 80s when the coal mines were closed down. So that was a very clear situation where an entire industry was being curtailed, but there was no, and I think it's fair to say that there wasn't as much planning as to what to do with the people that had been in those communities in working in those industries thereafter. And probably you could say that that still impacts our cultural and political and economic landscape in the UK today. So the question is, how do you transition away from something that is highly polluting, as we did at that time? And in fact, the closure of the coal mines reduced our carbon emissions by 50% at that time, but also how do you do it without creating serious negative social impact? But for real estate, it's not so stark what just transition is. That's what I have found. So in 2023, we hosted a conference. Again, you'll find information about that on the Lloyds Bank website, where we got some of the leading academics and practitioners to speak about what they thought that it meant, generally across all of the sectors. But then last year in 2024, we hosted some roundtables speaking to real estate practitioners specifically. Really interesting conversations, some which take you in a very different direction to where you think that you're going to go, if I'm honest. But there you can see that the 4 points that we really landed on. I found it interesting specifically that when we talk about just transition in real estate, people were constantly talking about legislation. Obviously, we can't do anything about that. They then talk about the economic model. As a bank, we can't really do anything like that. They're much bigger questions than we have control over, even though we do, from a policy perspective, do put forward our views to government. What we do have an interest in, and what we are able to do something about, though, and think about, is human capital. Because if we want to decarbonise, we know that we need people to have the right skill sets. We know we need people to that can do the door-to-door knocking. Things like retrofitting are actually very painstaking pieces of work, which are very human capital intensive. The other thing that became clear was this point around human capital is actually not just a retrofitting or a just transition issue. It becomes an industry issue. And then you start learning that there is a huge construction worker deficit in the real estate industry that we're not sure how we're going to overcome. We have an issue trying to attract people to the industry. So we started thinking about whether this was a just transition issue or actually just an industry-wide issue that we should be engaging for the longevity of our sector. So you'll see there a little note on the event that we ran with Real Estate Balance towards the back end of last year, talking about how we bridge that skills gap. And this year, we're going to be thinking much more around how to attract and retain people within the industry. And I don't think it necessarily means people doing a lot differently, but I think it means doing things intentionally, thinking about how you reach out to different communities, thinking about how you create cultures within whatever your subject sector of this sector is that enable people to come in and stay within the industry as well. So just moving on to my last slide. And this slide maybe is a bit of a show off, but essentially the reason, I turn my lights back on, maybe the reason that I wanted to talk about this is because I work for a bank, right? I work for a bank. And so even though I can encourage people to talk about just transition within their companies, and I can encourage the sector to talk about just transition, and I can work with other organizations to create best guidance, as we intend to do, best practice guidance for just transition, and really crystallizing it to that skills gap. Ultimately, as a group and as a company, we provide finance. So this was our attempt, I think, at doing something that was just transition finance, if there is such a term. I'd like to coin it if anyone else will like to use it as well. But it's how we could work with the National Wealth Fund to reduce the cost of finance that goes to the social housing sector. So we essentially have designed, through a guarantee that's given to us by the National Wealth Fund, a product for green retrofit for the social housing sector, so they can use the monies for whatever they want, effectively, as long as it qualifies as green. We have a very long list of measures that aren't exclusively retrofit, actually. They do encompass biodiversity measures as well. Of course, low carbon energy, renewable energy, all of those technologies that we need to take us to the next level, really, to be honest, in the built environment. And then this is given unsecured, because one of the issues that the social housing sector has is the cost of granting security to banks when they borrow. So that, to me, I'm very proud of. We're currently in negotiations and putting together our first term. Well, we've put together the term sheet, putting together our first documents on these. And I think that it will really make a difference. And as I said, I was at the conference last week with the social housing sector, and they were all talking about this. We're not the only bank that has the offering, for sure. But I think that this is compelling for them because they can't get all the money that they need from government. We know that it's essentially green. We know that it's discounted, and we know that it's going to be supporting the most vulnerable people in society. So that, to me, is just transition finance. I won't go on in my slides, but if you have any interest in the Regeneration Brainery workshops that we do, where we go into schools, we would be delighted if you would contact them or us to get involved in that. And then also for anyone that's in the process, I guess, of procuring houses, I would definitely invite you to have a look at the next generation standards that we have developed alongside Homes England and also the UK GBC, in order to create what we think is, what's definitive as sustainable within the house builder sector. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Chi, for sharing that with us. I wanted to ask you just a little bit, that final point that you just made, which was around Regeneration Brainery. Can you tell us a little bit more about that program?
Yeah, sure. I must admit that I've not actually been to one of them. Every time I try to get along to someone and something goes along, but many people from the bank do. And what we do from our perspective is, first of all, I should take a few steps back. We realized that skills was a challenge in the industry, and we wanted to bring new people into the industry. So I think about 4 years ago, we decided to sponsor them. So we've been their lead sponsor for quite a few years, but now other organizations are joining and stepping up to the plate on that. And essentially what they do is they go into a school, usually in a deprived or inner city area, but that is not necessarily in London. It could be anywhere in the country. I think this is what's important about this. It's going to places where the children may not be thinking about the careers in this industry. And so you'll have someone who's a relationship director, so who has relationships with developers and lends to them and understands the business from that perspective. We also have people from places like JLL, other industries within the real estate industry that come and basically give a 101 to the schools about how you do that. So just so that you can trigger their minds in terms of what the potential and possibilities are, and that it's not just one route to something perhaps a bit dull, like being a lawyer, and I say that as being a lawyer, but those are the things that people see and are the obvious options, but there's so much more. And I think everyone would agree you can have a really worthwhile career in the real estate industry. The other thing that I'd mention actually is that there are other organizations out there that actually try to bring children onto work sites from schools so that they can see it day to day. I think there is a sense that, and I think my parents would probably have been a bit like this, they wouldn't really have thought that you could start with no skills and no qualification, maybe doing construction work or on the construction site, and end up CEO of a company. But that is possible in this industry, and it's also possible to earn a very good salary. So yeah, I think it's just trying to demystify and educate people really that regeneration does, and it does it really well, and we really would encourage everyone to get involved with that. I also mentioned the Real Estate Balance, the organization. It's a DEI organization that we work with, that I think does really impactful work in this space as well.
I was really relieved to hear your assertion that Lloyd's is kind of sticking with ESG, that this is continuing to use the same language, to not try to change or shift the policies in any way. But I wondered, what is the vibe over the, or what is the sense over the next 5 years about how, is it just stay the course? Is it increased robustness in metrics to support, to justify or support these standards? Or what, is there any changing vibe in response to the current climate, which is wobbly?
Okay, so I'm going to use this analogy, and forgive me if I stretch it a bit too far, but the way that I see it, and this is bearing in mind that I am one of those people that jumped on the wagon, right, the bandwagon in 2021, in terms of I've been doing things related to sustainability and pushing towards that in my previous career, but this was where, I became all in when I joined Lloyd's. And a lot of that, the startup of our team, came out of COVID, right? There was this moment during that pandemic where people wanted to build back better. So we definitely, I think, rose that wave. And I think we're now beginning to see the tide go back and figuring out what's left on the beach. I told you it's a really dodgy analogy. I'll think of a better one. But sustainability was always there, right? But now we've got to see whether the language that we were using, the concepts that we were trying to introduce, can be embedded in normal BAU. And so I actually think the language has changed somewhat. And I think we have to change, because I need to be able to talk the language of every banker that I work with. Otherwise, what's my value here? And I need to get them to understand the value that I bring from a sustainability perspective to our normal lending business, to my clients' development business, to my clients' investment business. What does this translate into for you day to day? So that's what I think this is about. I'm not sure that I can give you a 5-year prediction, but I'm hoping I'm still in a job. But I think that my job will actually be, if I've done well, my job, what I'm doing now, will be done by coverage, will be done by other people in their day to day. And they won't probably use words that include sustainability, but what we will be doing will just be more sustainable. I think it is difficult. And one of the main challenges is around the economic benefit. So there was definitely a period where people wanted to do things because it was the right thing to do. We hit the headwinds in 2023, the economic headwinds in 2023. And now I think you have to really be much more articulate around what is the bottom line benefit here. It may not be a direct one, and it may not be one that's going to crystallize in the next 12 months. It might actually be in 5 years' time. But if you don't start investing now into that, then you're going to find yourself stranded, or you're going to find yourself having developed something in a community developed something in a place where you've not created a community that will sustain your place, as it were, to bring it back to the title of today. So
I think that kind of speaks to something that I've heard you speak about before, which is the concept of social risk. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about this idea of social risk and how that's useful as a lens for people to think about, because it is this idea that you've kind of hinted at here. Well, what is the risk of an investment that then doesn't work as a place or for its people?
Yeah, I think we've seen that crystallize in many ways, haven't we, since COVID? We've seen it crystallize in retail for sure. And I'm thinking, I'm not far from one of my clients' retail spots where actually you can see that a lot of the retailers have actually stepped back because we've all become a lot more online. We're not in the office or in the city, wherever we are, shopping as much as we used to. So what then can a venue become? I think this is a question. How can you reinvent it? And I think we've seen a lot of exciting reinvention done through bringing the local communities into space. So I think the social risk is actually when things go bad and the economics don't work, or it could be a climate resilience thing, where is the community that is actually going to bring that place back to life and that is going to invest in it because it means something to them rather than something that's been done to them, if that makes sense? We have a
and it
wonderful...
kind of speaks to...
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, please. No, you
Well,
first. The other wonderful
conversation that I had last week with one of my social housing clients, Pobble. So they're based in Wales, actually. And, over coffee for 20 minutes, they talked about how they were going to regenerate a particular site that they had, but they understood how they needed to do it from a community perspective. And what I see in social housing, and what they do so well, is that they deliver social impact through different things. So they're going to deliver social impact through regeneration. They also deliver social impact through decarbonisation in the way in which they do decarbonisation. So what I find fascinating is actually where you stop thinking about the thing that you're trying to achieve and think about that greater thing, and then use that as a vehicle, if that makes sense. That's what I'm beginning to see. It probably sounds a little bit vague, and of course I'm not a technician, but that's what I'm observing in some of the best people that are dealing with what I think is essentially social risk, because you don't want to invest into a place and not see the dividends of it in the long term.
It kind of dovetails into the question from Claire Richards, who's the founder of Footwork, who says, thank you for your very clear explanation of achieving the just transition. This does require a clear social as well as environmental shift. And how is Lloyd's supporting social sustainability to achieve that S in ESG?
So I wouldn't be the expert, actually. We do have experts on this. So we've got someone called Beth Knight, but I think if you were to look at our sustainability, if you look at that, you will see some of the things that we're doing. In my part of the bank, it's pretty much the sort of things that I've been describing to you in terms of the organisations that we do support. We obviously give them grants. We don't have to do that. I'm not really sure exactly what direct feedback we get from that, but we think it's the right thing we do, right thing to do for the sectors that we ultimately benefit from through our lending relationships. On a broader scale, as a group, we've done more in terms of social sustainability. And sometimes that, because we're a bank, that's things that you might not necessarily think about, but it's about how people can engage with the platform. So on the retail side, for example, there's been a lot of investment in terms of creating a mobile app that people can connect through, not because mobile is the thing to go, but because a lot of people have different diverse ways of engaging. And so they do that in a way that they can engage with the widest group of people, which often then caters for people that have accessibility issues or are neurodiverse, etc. So as an organization, there is a lot going on. I'm afraid I don't want to underplay what the bank is doing, but I think you'd probably be better off looking at the social sustainability report before I sort of misrepresent what we're doing.
I wanted to ask you about your social housing clients and some of the challenges that they're facing with regards to decarbonization. You mentioned this fund around retrofit and that kind of the need for that. I mean, retrofitting is a huge part of the decarbonization agenda. And I guess, how is that going? You said there's lots of excitement in the market about this fund and this opportunity for funding. But if we look at that decarbonization within social housing specifically, what are you seeing?
So excitement about the product, which is great because a lot of work goes into producing the product. I think the social housing sector is quite specific because it's under so much pressure to do so much with so little. So what we often find when we're structuring sustainability linked loans with clients is that they say that they would love to invest more into retrofit, but they need to prioritize cladding or damp and mold issues or those other things that hit the headlines, understandably, ahead of retrofit. So this balancing trick that they have to do is incredibly difficult. I think that they are actually experimenting in retrofit a lot more than people would probably give them credit for. And by that, I mean that we have many clients that are trying to create new business models, new economic models to fund their retrofit, apart from building new homes and then using the income from that to retrofit. And we're trying to support that in our way by actually running a pilot this year. So working with an organization which is a prop tech company, which is a startup that puts sensors into properties. We're doing this in the social housing sector with Bromford. We're putting sensors into those some homes, 100 homes, and then they run an infrared heat scan of the home, and then take all of that information to create a digital twin. They then use that twin and compare it against the EPC, which is obviously modeled as opposed to real or live data. They use that then to extrapolate what the retrofit program should be. Now, all being well, the pilot we think will show us that it would be more cost effective to do a live assessment of a property in order to create the retrofit programming, and therefore save money that you could then apply to perhaps other things that a social housing entity wants to do, or move further to putting in the low carbon heating or the social the PV on the home, rather than following the EPC model. So that's the kind of thing that I think could be quite interesting and allow this industry to innovate. And I think, as I said, we see quite a few of the housing associations, particularly the larger ones, that are happy to kind of take that risk and see where it gets us. But obviously, anything that they do, all of us that are outside in any other sector or that own a home or are responsible for a home will benefit from that technology as well.
So that digital twin allowing them to be more strategic in the retrofit that they'll eventually do. So they'll show whether this is a window or a kind of insulation, or to prioritize those interventions.
What to prioritize. What happens, or what we've seen so far, is actually that an EPC model might suggest that you need to do the insulation. But I think when we've seen this in the Climate Change Committee's 7th carbon budget, which came out a few weeks ago, they are also beginning to shift away from, fabric first towards actually, do we just, well, they call it energy efficiency. You might say just get net zero ready, or get to a minimum standard that enables you to take that next step towards bringing the carbon emissions down, which of course is low carbon heat. So again, the things are changing, I think, in this space, and I think that particularly in the social housing space means that there will be more money available for the social work that they do ultimately.
I think it'd be quite in terms of the government changes that have been coming through. Is there anything that you would like to see, or that you are heartened to see from a policy perspective, or that you think would be better structured to kind of support, especially social housing, the building of social housing and the improvement of social housing stock? Are you seeing what you need in terms of clarity or vision from this government, or are there things you're not seeing yet that you would like to?
I think exactly on that point, we prepared a white paper last year, which was submitted to the government, effectively calling for a new form of social contract. So at the moment, the way that the social housing sector is structured is based on benefits. That's how we fund the rental payments. The thrust of this paper is that maybe we should be thinking about payments to develop more housing, if that is what we want to do. So, as I say, there's a white paper out there which is available for anyone to look at in more detail. But that's one of the key asks, I think, and there's been a lot of internal investment into that, thinking about the model of financing this sector to enable them to do more. And another thing that comes to mind, which I think actually is also as critical, most people will be aware, but electricity is actually priced in a way that makes it more expensive. Or perhaps I should reframe that. Gas is subsidized and electricity is not, which means that if we know that the route to decarbonisation is electrification, we actually need to make sure that it's at least on par with gas. Now, there are very good reasons as to why gas has been subsidised over time, but it does sometimes result in a perverse scenario where somebody who goes ahead to then put in a ground source heat pump or whatever it is ends up paying higher bills, which is not something in the social housing sector that sits right. So those are 2 points I'd probably suggest specifically to social housing. But I think as a general note, obviously, the more ambitious the trajectory for MEES and other sort of related policy around decarbonisation and nature in this sector would be appreciated and helps me do my job more easily. Yeah.
How is the sector feeling about biodiversity net gain and some of those measures that have come in? Is that being adopted as you talk about business as usual? Is that being absorbed as business as usual now?
Yeah, I'm very lucky because I cover social housing, but I also cover our commercial real estate and some of the world leading real estate operators. And I think many of them were very keen to embrace biodiversity net gain. Some of them, in fact, when they don't have to, they've done so voluntarily. They've done it on investment properties, not just on development. So that's great to see. I think for the majority, it's mandated, so they have to comply. There are some exceptions, and we've got this transition period effectively, haven't we, that we're seeing at the moment, whilst people really begin to become subject to these new regulations. I'm a little bit surprised, I think, with how little I've heard since its launch last February around biodiversity net gain. But it's something that we're about to lean into, I think, much more as a bank, because we do see the voluntary carbon market and the nature market as something that could be really interesting, because we have such a large influence within the built environment system, and then also we're the largest lender to the agricultural system as well, and we're trying to understand how do we leverage that, what can we unlock with that network. So yeah, to your point, I think perhaps I've seen less than I expected, but I think it's because it's a complicated space. And my sense is that the solution isn't necessarily going to be about creating lots of sites where it's just biodiversity net gain, but it's actually about creating sites where you can layer biodiversity net gain with a broader sort of ecological impact, perhaps with renewable energy. So you bring in the social impact as well, and making sure that the community is involved. So you have these different layers of income, and then perhaps we can support people in the agricultural sector that at the moment are struggling, to say the least. We need to remediate our land we know that we need to remediate farmland. So this is one way of sort of bringing that income to that sector.
I see a lot of thumbs up coming up
Yeah,
around the need to renew land in the agricultural sector. Can you talk a little bit about the nature market and the carbon market for those in the audience who may not be sure about what the trends are in that area?
Oof. I'm not sure. Well, I think there are definitely people that could tell you what the trends are, but I think it's way too early to say exactly what it is and what the size of the prize is in that space, people scoping it. There are a lot of early starters for sure. So, I could throw out a few names like the Environment Bank that saw this coming, that have an interesting model. Octopus also have a natural capital approach, which I think is interesting. But I personally am still trying to get my head around exactly where the demand is for it, and where the pricing was going to be. So what was interesting about carbon and setting a price on carbon, or requiring people to pay for the carbon that they emit or are responsible for, was it created an income that could then be used by people who wanted to create worthwhile projects. So those projects could be just carbon sequestration, but they ideally, I would say, would be biodiversity related as well. So ultimately this time there is no mandate for biodiversity credits. So what we're seeing is that the best carbon reduction projects are ones that actually do nature as well. So you have that additionality. But at the moment, on its own, nature, it's hard to stand unless it's patient capital or philanthropic capital. That's what I've seen so far. But again, I would say I'm not the expert on this. There are people in my team that I'm going to be engaging with actually over the next few months. So we want to speak to our clients to understand exactly what their needs are more this year.
I think that's super helpful because, of course, working in the real estate space, there's not always awareness of what's happening on that kind of trend.
Yes.
And when you talk about the kind of multi-delivery, you mean if it's a solar farm that also does nature, that's something that
Yeah,
changes it compared
absolutely.
to, yeah.
Yeah. So there's
Yeah.
technology out there that allows you to raise the solar panels so that things can happen underneath them. So animals can graze, or I think produce can be grown. So I mean, I think that's got to be intuitively to me the way forward.
So for people coming back from this and thinking, I want to initiate a conversation within my my organization around the just transition, what are some questions you might encourage them to discuss around, the boardroom table, or to begin to kind of acknowledge how they can adopt that lens?
I think you have to look at your business and where the interactions of the impacts of your business are with on society, your local community, on your staff, and even more broadly, right? When you think about international supply chains as well. I think once you have assessed that, then there is a place, as you do with all sustainability, really, of figuring out what is most material and where can I have most impact. Because we can't all change everything. So for us as a bank, what is most material and where we can have most impact is in our lending. That's what we've done. And for another organization, that actually might be more in terms of the way they employ people and the way they think about their decarbonisation strategy and people within that. So does that mean some people are going to lose their jobs? Does that mean that other jobs are going to be created? If it's not within your organization, is it your supply chain? And how can you encourage your supply chain to think about people as they deliver what their product to you as well? Procurement, actually, I think could be a huge unlock within this industry of just transition, because we don't necessarily have that direct impact, but we could do one step away. The other thing I would say, I know we're running out of time, is just that we have a wealth of resources, and I think I might have written something on exactly that question in 2023. So do have a look at the Lloyds Bank website. If you type in just transition, you'll find a whole series of articles that we've designed, but working with people with ED, in fact, the sustainability magazine, and working with people that are experts in this sector, in this theme. So the resources are there for anyone to use.
Brilliant. And I know tomorrow we've seen some just transition work in community engagement, where people who have been involved in community engagement in real estate have been employed while they've done that and have gone on to gain skills through that process, and then gone on to seek jobs or gotten back into the jobs market through their community engagement. So that's like another really great example, I think, of how your involvement in a property development, how your work in property can then go on to kind of help people into work either on the scheme itself or just somewhere else through the skills they've achieved there. Well, you're right. That does bring us to the end of the session. So thanks so much, Chi, for sharing that with us. It was hugely interesting to have that glimpse into your world, and also those tips, I think, for how to apply these lenses and how they work in real estate and all of those interconnections. So this concludes this session, but actually Chi mentioned Octopus Investments, and they're going to be joining us next to talk about place-based impact investing. So join us on the hour with Jack Burnham, Head of Affordable Housing at Octopus Investments, Peter Merchant, Investment Director at Octopus Investments, and Mark Gaylor, who is Head of Pensions and Investments at Devon County Council. And they're going to be discussing affordable and social housing and some projects that they've been involved in. So see you for that on the hour. Thank you.